Hello once again. This is going to be our review for week two, going over, first of all, the PowerPoint questions, the questions from the Ancient Near East PowerPoint. Looking at question number one here, with the transition to larger, more sedentary societies, people went from religious ideas of shamanism and ancestor worship to worshiping more anthropomorphic or human-like gods. Why might this have occurred? Well, really what you start seeing happening at this point in time as human societies become larger and more complex, it seems like the religious institutions follow suit, and that the religions become generally more complicated and more complex in nature as well. This isn't overly surprising. If you have to think, for example, ancestor worship would work generally well when you're living in a society where you relatively know all the people around you, you kind of know who their ancestors were, and that you can still kind of have a connection with the various people and the beings that they are worshiping and relying upon in their everyday life. That system begins to really break down when you're starting to live in societies of thousands of people. You're not interacting with one another on nearly as regular a basis, if ever, and it seems like much easier for people to start trying to anthropomorphize these gods into pretty much gods filling hierarchical structures similar to what you are now seeing in human societies, if that makes sense. And we'll touch on this a little bit more in question number two. But now that humans are living in a more stratified society, it seems like they are making the gods themselves kind of mirror this, and the gods themselves become more hierarchical, if that makes sense, as well. So just kind of the change in the way humans are living seems to have a really direct impact on the religion that they are implying. And you see lots of these kind of shifts in various locations which have adopted agriculture throughout the world at varying time periods. Another interesting aspect about this transition is when you start relying on agriculture, you start seeing gods having a much closer tie to natural elements and natural forces. If you think of a lot of the gods in the PowerPoint here, they're tied to water, to the sun, to cultivation, to fertility, and so forth. You're going to see the exact same thing next week when we start looking more at Egypt, where a lot of these gods have a direct tie to specific natural forces, and a lot of times the most important gods are the gods that have the most direct tie to agriculture, gods of water, gods of the sun, and so forth. Things that are necessary to be raising crops and sustaining kind of the new lifestyle that people are now pretty much inhabiting and surviving off of. So yeah, a very interesting way to kind of look at these parallels between the way people are kind of living and worshiping and this transition that's happening in this time period going to larger and larger and more complex societies. Moving on to question number two, like I said, this sort of ties into the first question as well. What are some of the possible reasons that these new kings were able to transfer power away from temple rulers and town assemblies? And a lot of you had great answers for this. We're able to take what I presented in the PowerPoint and come up with some good scenarios. Pretty much as warfare became more and more common, and these individuals were given both secular and religious authority for longer periods of time, you can see how eventually they would find ways to just keep that power on a more permanent basis and find ways to kind of erode the more traditional power of religious or civic groups within their towns and within their cities. And if you think even in today's political climate, military heroes or war heroes oftentimes transfer to political positions, and a lot of people see them as really kind of ideal political candidates if they're really good kind of leaders in warfare or leaders on the battlefield. So this even kind of has resonance today, and it's very easy to see how this process could have occurred in the past. Of course, once these kings became were able to gain a position of power, it was really easy, and it just come another step from there to make their position hereditary and to start forming a lot of the systems and a lot of the kind of components of society around a kingship model. For example, a more kind of intricate tie-in between kingship and religion. Like I said in the previous question, you start seeing kind of the religious structure of a lot of societies becoming a lot more hierarchical at this time as well. For example, you'll start seeing a lot of these kind of pantheon of gods having one god who's a king of the gods, or some of the gods being more kind of important or obtaining a higher status. And that's really starting to mirror kind of the human societies which they are being modeled off of at the same time as well. So pretty kind of interesting component how that is now being used, kind of the institution of kingship is affecting the religion itself, but then these kings are also using that religion to justify their own positions. and that, you know, gods of kingship very early on become very important to a lot of these societies, particularly early because they are there to really kind of prop up and support this sort of new position that a lot of these cities seem to have created for the real strong military leaders within their societies. So overall, very good answers and a few things to think about there. Going on to question number 3, looking at the above hymn by Ed Juanana about the goddess Inanna. Being the first recorded piece of creative writing with a known author, what can it tell us about Mesopotamian culture? And a lot of people did some really good primary source analysis on this, looking at it and realizing that really this hymn kind of paints a dual picture of the goddess of Inanna. How on the one hand that she's kind of resplendent in light and this righteous woman clothed in radiance. She has these powerful aspects for civilization, you know, is involved in fertility and so forth. But there's also this other aspect of her where she's incredibly fickle and that she can be very, very dangerous. And that this kind of shows really this sort of dual nature that the Mesopotamians had with their goddesses. Another interesting point that a lot of people came up with and made was that this was a hymn about a female goddess written by a female priest, which led some people to speculate that there could have been more equality within religion within Mesopotamian society, and women could have held a higher and more kind of important role within their society. And this is kind of an example where you sort of have to be careful by using documents like this too much without knowing more of the context and finding more information. Because just looking at this, that's an excellent piece of primary source analysis, and that is kind of gives you a first idea of, you know, what to start looking for. But if you push further, you would realize that this individual, Ed Juanana, actually held a very rare position, and that she was really only appointed to this kind of special position as priestess of the moon by her father, who is Sargon the Great, who had taken over this empire, pretty much tried to make a new, very important religious position for his daughter, and that most women within Mesopotamia did not have a similar role within religion, that Ed Juanana was very kind of unique in this respect. And typically women in general were not, they were kind of kept out of politics, kept out of leadership roles within Mesopotamia to a much larger degree than we've seen some of the other societies that we're going to be talking about. Egypt, for example, has a much longer tradition of female rulers than Mesopotamia does. So even though they're kind of exalting a female goddess here, and Inanna is a very interesting goddess in the fact that she kind of fulfills these dual roles, which I'll be talking a little bit more about in a moment here. But that she's very much an outlier, that most of the other gods in the pantheon are male. But it seems like, yeah, she has a higher position than most women within Mesopotamian society would have had. And that gives us kind of the second aspect of Inanna in this hymn here. And that's the fact that she can be incredibly dangerous and is almost like a war god at the same point in time. It talks about her kind of depositing venom on foreign lands. And if you'll notice, all these kind of things that she is credited with being able to do, that they're very much kind of disasters tied with agriculture, right? This gets back to this idea of how important agriculture now is to this pantheon of the gods. For example, depositing venom on foreign lands, that could be an allegory for plague and pestilence, perhaps. Remember now that humans are living in much closer proximity. They're also living in closer proximity with large land animals. There's a lot more diseases that are going to be transferred to human populations than really had ever been transferred before when they were in smaller hunting-gathering societies. So you can see that kind of transposed in here. Talking about roaring at the earth so that no vegetation can stand up to you. You can easily see how that's a kind of allegory to drought and to lack of water and that people's crops withering up and so forth. And of course, a flood depositing on foreign lands, flooding being a very kind of important aspect and very much potentially disastrous to the Mesopotamians based upon their geography. And you can really see how all of these different elements of kind of the precarious nature of agriculture makes their way into their worship of the gods throughout this time period. And it's going to be a really interesting comparison, and our document exercise for next week is going to look at this in a lot more detail, kind of comparing the natural environment of Mesopotamia to that of Egypt. So kind of keep this in mind when we start talking about the document exercise for next week as well. Looking at PowerPoint question number 4, what aspects of civilization that we still identify today do you see present in early Mesopotamian cultures? For the most part, everyone did a really good job on this, mentioning the impact with math and mathematics, with astronomy, with time, breaking days into the kind of the 60-hour minute, 12-hour days, and so forth. Looking at the legal systems and using Hammurabi and his law codes as an example of trying to set down kind of formulated legal systems that, of course, our world today is very much dependent and reliant upon. And yeah, I thought everyone made some very, very good observations for this question. And that, yeah, I mean, a lot of the outline and basic pattern that we see replicated by future civilizations, both within the Near East and for the most part around the world, you can kind of see present within this very early Mesopotamian society that we were talking about here. And finally, going down to PowerPoint question number 5, can you draw any parallels between this very first version of international diplomacy and diplomacy as it's practiced today? So a lot of people once more brought up some really good ideas as far as exchanging of gifts between one group and another, finding a way to form a balance of power so that one group can't just become too powerful and just willy-nilly go around attacking everyone. They need to work with other countries and other nations that are out there in order to try to maintain peace. And that you can kind of see a very similar thing happening here in the ancient Near East, where a lot of these kingdoms could not gain the upper hand over one another militarily, so they had to find ways to come together and work in order to sort of sort everything out. And it was a pretty kind of advanced system with diplomats going back and forth from one kingdom to another, exchanging gifts, sometimes exchanging wives and brides, linking families together. So a pretty advanced and pretty sophisticated communication system between all these varying kingdoms. It really kind of gives a cool early look at diplomacy between states, and a lot of once more, kind of the archetype that we see developed here is replicated throughout history in a lot of other civilizations and societies, really up until the present time. All right, so those are the PowerPoint questions. We're going to be moving on next to taking a closer look at the document workshop, the primary source workshop, and discussions for this week. All right, here we're looking at our first document exercise for this semester, and I really want this first document activity and discussion to just kind of serve as sort of a learning opportunity for a lot of people. I know some of you might not have gotten the grade you wanted, but this will give you a really good idea of what to expect moving forward, and I'll tell you how to really kind of take the documents, find some of this information, and kind of get the grade that you're looking for. So if you lost a few points and you're not sure exactly why or how that occurred, hopefully going through this will help fill in some of that information. But also I want to stress this point that if you ever want direct feedback on the discussion board as far as any missing points, go ahead and email me, and I will get back to you explaining in detail exactly what I was thinking throughout the grading process and what you could do to potentially make up and get full points going forward. So if you have any questions, go ahead and let me know after watching our review here, if that doesn't clear anything up for you. So for the most part, the biggest area where people would lose points would be if they either did not answer all of the questions. Remember, you have to answer each and every part of the question that is listed, or else you did not bring in enough specific examples from the documents. So a lot of people who had like 8 points, 7 or 8 points, or 9 points, that's usually the range where your answers to the questions were good. I was just looking for a few more details from the document that could be added in to kind of serve as an example for what you were saying or what you were talking about. Let's take the first question here for an example. Based on these two documents, list some of the responsibilities and expectations of Mesopotamian kings. As you can see, I've kind of highlighted a few of the areas here which I'm talking about that a lot of people in the document exercise kind of use as an example of what we're talking about. For example, under Gilgamesh, he knew the secret things, and he laid them bare. The idea of a leader having to have a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom, they really kind of stressed that early on in the discussion about Gilgamesh. He made the walls, people made some kind of interesting comparisons between Gilgamesh and Donald Trump wanting to build walls. But, I guess it's still kind of a statement of what a strong leader could or should do. Walls are kind of a good strength statement. So yeah, who knows? That might actually kind of be something that still resonates today to a certain degree. There's also this religious aspect in here where he also kind of built up the temple of Inanna. Inanna is another name for Ishtar, we talked about her earlier in the document exercise or in the PowerPoint questions, but the same kind of female goddess. And they go through and list a number of other kind of religious roles that he fulfilled. He fared many hardships. He's considered a hero. Once more, talking about kind of this rise of kingship, this idea that kind of heroes, war heroes, people in battle, people who are strong leaders, are kind of seen at this point in time as being the people who are fulfilling these roles of kings. A lot of people like this next quote and use this quite a bit. He leads the way, he the foremost, he also marches at the rear, a helper to his brothers. And yeah, I think a lot of people kind of are really onto something here. This idea of depicting a leader as not only kind of in the forefront, being a leader, but someone who's willing to go to the back and make sure no one's left behind and bringing them forward. Someone actually made the comparison with this quote to Martin Luther King, which I thought was really, really great. So in just this one document exercise, there's a comparison Gilgamesh to Donald Trump. I thought someone during the document exercise compared him in his authoritarian style to Adolf Hitler. Now here's someone comparing him to Martin Luther King. And to some degree, what we're reading here, there's a bit of truth in each one of those. Obviously, Gilgamesh was exactly like none of those three historic figures. But kind of getting to the third question, these are the kind of examples that people were picking out and using great examples from the document to kind of explain how these rulers were like future rulers. And I thought you all did a very good job doing that. And once more, with a lot of these document exercises, what you're going to find is that there's not one correct or right answer that I'm looking for. As long as you read the document and you find a way to interpret it that makes sense to you, and you actually use what's in the document, the words that are there to explain and provide evidence for what you're saying, that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to be thinking critically about the document and about the text itself. And that's really what is most important, and that's what's going to get you the most points moving forward. Also, a lot of people brought up the fact here that Gilgamesh is depicted as 2/3 God and 1/3 man. This really feeds in well to the comparison between him and Hammurabi, who is much more viewed as being kind of a servant of the gods, as being an honor of the gods, or being humble before the gods, and not really comparing himself to a god. And that honestly is a lot closer to your typical Mesopotamian king. Most of the kings did not think they themselves were gods, but really viewed themselves as being directly beholden to the gods and the main primary servants of the gods on earth. And of course, kind of the physical physique of Gilgamesh adds into this as well. There's a number of lines here kind of describing how what a great kind of physique he had, but the form of his body no one can match. I think is a really easy and kind of simple way that is brought up and indicated in this document, which I also saw plenty of people using as a really good point out from this from the documents within their answers. Moving on to Hammurabi, talking about the exalted prince who feared God. This kind of once more this depiction and this difference between him and Gilgamesh, which a lot of people did a good job pointing out. Also depicting him as someone who would destroy the wicked and evildoers so that the strong should not harm the weak. So that this idea that the king was not simply there in order to protect himself and protect kind of the warriors and the strong people, but try to help a larger percentage and larger portion of people within society as well. And it seems like that was perceived of as something that was directed to them from the gods. That was part of the king's responsibilities and the king's duties. And even Hammurabi's law code in general, a lot of people think that, I mean, originally these were carved on like these huge stone slabs and posted throughout the kingdom. And a lot of people think that was just kind of equally a form of propaganda as it was trying to legitimately enforce laws throughout this kingdom, that he was sort of just trying to show people that he was doing a legitimate job trying to fulfill his role of enforcing the gods' laws on earth, and that by posting these large stelae or these large kind of stone statues with this carved on it all throughout Mesopotamia, that he'd be able to show everyone that he was fulfilling his duties as a just and legitimate king. That being said, though, it's entirely possible that he really believed in what he was saying here, and that he kind of made an effort to address some of these with his laws. Although a lot of people did also point out a very good point within their discussion, that Hammurabi, a lot of his laws had a very unequal way in which they treated people, and people of an upper class typically had much lighter sentences and punishments, and people of a lower class or slaves were typically punished much harsher and much more. So that it was still operating within a very stratified society, and that his laws really did back that up and enforce that. But plenty of other good examples that you could have brought out in reviewing Hammurabi as well. Shepherd of the Oppressed and the Slaves, another example a lot of people pointed out. And once more, kind of this idea that when Marduk sent me to rule over men, to give the protection of right of land, I did right and righteousness, and brought about well-being of the oppressed. Once more, making the case that Marduk, who is a god, pretty much the god in charge of kingship, gave this responsibility and this duty to Hammurabi, and Hammurabi is here saying, I have fulfilled this duty and this responsibility. So hopefully that gave you a little idea and some examples of the pieces you could have picked out and used throughout the example, what a lot of students ended up doing, reading through them, and kind of what I'm looking for. I know very early on a lot of these documents are going to be rather challenging. A lot of times they might not make a lot of sense the way the wording is and the way they're structured. And just do the best you can with them. And like you said, try to interpret them as best you can, and then take your interpretations, find the evidence within the documents, put that evidence in either in direct quotes or just referring specifically to a portion or wording within the document for most of your answers, and that will help get you full points. A lot of people did a really good job of bringing in information from the PowerPoints or the book discussing Gilgamesh and Hammurabi, but remember you should always be blending that information from what we see here in the documents, because looking at the documents is the primary purpose, and really adding in more information from the book and outside sources is great, and that just kind of pushes you over the top and gives you kind of the as opposed to 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. But the primary focus should always be on the documents themselves and finding ways within the documents to exemplify the knowledge and the understanding that you've gained from the book, from the crash course videos, from the PowerPoint, and how that all works together. And as long as you form all that together within your answers, you should be getting pretty close to full points on every document exercise moving forward. So if you have any questions, like I said, on the grade you received, make sure to go on, check your grade, check them on a regular basis, and if you ever have any questions about why you received a particular grade, email me right away. I'm very quick at getting back, and I'm more than open to explaining my thought process through grading, what I'm looking for specifically, and helping you improve to move on for the next week's assignment. And really early on in the semester is when you really want to get into a lot of these good habits as far as what to look at in the documents, how to construct your answers, so that moving forward you'll be able to get full points on these and be able to engage in some really interesting conversations and discussing a lot of these aspects with your fellow classmates. One more final reminder, make sure that your total word length is 200 words for your answers, and that the word length for your responses to other students is at least 50 words. If it is under either of those, 200 words for your answers, 50 words for your responses to other students, you're going to start losing lots of points. So some people who only have 3 or 4 points, if you're wondering why you got hit really hard on the points for this example or for this activity and this assignment, that potentially could be one of the reasons. Your answers just simply were not long enough. That's all I have for right now. Any questions, go ahead and email me. Thanks for a good first week. I thought everyone generally overall did a very good job throughout the first couple of weeks, and I hope we're going good moving forward. All right, thanks a lot, and have a good week.